We got to get a better countdown than this. Hi, Ezra.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good also. So, hello, everybody.
Hello.
This is Empowering Democracy number 21. It's called Dump the Corruption in Some Key Races because we'll be discussing some key races tonight. Our election expert is Ezra Wilson.
Hello.
And I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Your other host, Lisa Theobald, could not be here tonight. So it's just the two of us. Okay, so I thought, of course, what was going on in Pennsylvania is still very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that what's happening to in the election in the Argonne 6th is also interesting because it's the second election of the year in which Andreas Salinas has to beat off a big money person who's throwing his weight around
Mm-hmm.
or his money around anyway.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a lot of money flowing now in many, many races. And in the show tomorrow, we're going to talk a lot more about the money that has been flowing. But for the races we're looking at here tonight, what is the monetary situation in the Fetterman race as you understand it?
Yeah. So I can actually. So we did get FEC data, and I think that's something we could talk about more on another show. But I'll talk about the Senate results because I do think that they're pretty interesting. In all of the key races, actually, Democrats outspended or out fundraised the Republican candidates by, in most cases, in every case, at least more than $1 million. In most cases, several million or tens of millions. And so the biggest of those leads outside of the Arizona Senate race was John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, where he raised about $3.3 million more than Dr. Oz. So Fetterman raised about 21,000. Fetterman or Oz raised about 7.8 thousand. I said thousand, sorry, 21 million, and Oz raised about 7.8 million. And when you consider what I assume is Fetterman has more in-state donations, he has more grassroots donations. I think that is a pretty healthy sign for his campaign, outraising Oz almost 3 times. Yeah.
But on the other hand, because Oz is so wealthy,
Yeah.
He has a lot of money available for the final run.
That is true. I don't know how much he's donating into his campaign anymore, but yeah, he certainly has a decent amount of money too. And yeah, as you mentioned.
Right, so he doesn't have any monetary limitations, actually, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but at least what Fetterman was able to do was to outraise him, and he probably retains also a lot of money for this final run.
Mm-hmm.
True?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. The question is, that even though Fetterman may have some limitations that Oz
Okay,
doesn't,
yeah, that's what I thought you were
he
saying. Okay.
still has plenty of money for the final run, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
And I agree. I mean, I think we do usually get another fundraising report before the election, depending on early voting and stuff like that. But I think that all of these campaign finance numbers that we got back, especially in the Senate, show some pretty healthy signs for the Democratic candidates. And I think especially Fetterman having such a high lead over Oz is going to be allow him to put in a lot of money, or just the Democrats in general to be putting in a lot of money into advertisements, to make up for that difference that Republicans have right now in those independent expenditures. Yeah.
So this is going to be a matter of people deciding the campaign based on their impressions of the different candidates. Okay, and maybe some issues will get involved in here. This doesn't seem to me to have been an issue-oriented campaign.
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, certainly, I think the primary was in large part, at least on the Democratic side. Fetterman really ran issues campaign.
Yes.
I think he still is, even though a lot of it is sort of mudslinging between him and Oz, or trying to show that Oz is ridiculous, or that Fetterman's too extreme, or things like that. But I still think at the end of the day, Fetterman has done a pretty good job talking about the issues that he supports in a way that I think makes him a bit more appealable to your everyday person than a lot of political candidates usually get to.
All right, and even though they may not be talking much about the issues right now in the campaign, still, based on his previous record, and he's been campaigning all over the state. He's had rallies all over the state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I suppose that people have a pretty good impression of where he stands on the issues.
Yeah.
And so he's a well-defined personality in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay, is Oz a well-defined personality in Pennsylvania also?
I mean, given that Oz probably didn't live in Pennsylvania until about a year and a half ago, no. And everyone knows him off being a snake oil salesman, but
Does Oz live in Pennsylvania now?
he has, I think it's a relative's address or something like that he lists as his own, to say he lives there or whatever. I forget what that whole story was. But no, unless maybe it's one of his 6 houses or something like that is in Pennsylvania, but for the most part, I don't think he's lived in Pennsylvania until he planned to run for the Senate, and he wasn't voting in Pennsylvania before either.
My question really was, is he actually living in Pennsylvania
Yeah,
now?
I know. Probably.
It's, I mean, he could be living in New Jersey, right, even now.
He could, yeah.
I mean, it's only a stone's throw away.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of interesting that. Okay, so anyway, what do you think the foci of the two campaigns will be during these final 3 weeks?
I mean, I think Oz isn't going to change it up, and I think that is ultimately what is putting Fetterman in a really good position, is that Oz just says, you're a socialist like Bernie, or you had a stroke, you're not fit for office, or something like that. And I think that's pretty much what he's got on Fetterman. That's what the ads are. That's what the debate performance was. That's what his social media is. And I don't think that's a really good focus point for any campaign, especially if you don't have really strong scandals. And those are not really strong scandals or attacks for Fetterman. They just make Dr. Oz come off as ableist or stupid. And I think that is hurting a lot of potential voters, right? And I think that's why we see, And Fetterman, on the other hand, I think is just going to be showing that, he had a stroke, but he's capable of running a really solid and aggressive campaign where he is touring around the state and he's showing up everywhere and he's focusing on the issues, talking about inflation, talking about healthcare, talking about, climate. And that's something that, doesn't always work, sadly. A lot of voters don't, I don't know, sometimes they don't seem to care as much about the issues as I personally feel like they should. But overall, I think that still shows a strong candidate when they're really able to talk about the issues coherently, especially, and their opponent really isn't.
Okay, so let's say Fetterman in the final days decides to really focus on the economic issues in the campaign
Mm-hmm.
and to go hard on that.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that Fetterman does very well when he debates Oz on October 28th.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't the Oz campaign in danger of falling apart in the final days?
I kind of think it already has or did, except it's got a minor bounce now that I think is really only there because there's a national bounce back to Republicans the past week or two, especially. But I think, yeah, I think once there's another really good debate performance, and I certainly think that that's what it's going to be, and if Oz keeps having these, I don't want to say scandals, but these weird comments or
Little faux pas.
poor performances and things like that. I think that's just gonna. I kind of feel like he's hit his ceiling almost, and that it's really hard for his campaign to go anywhere. Whereas sort of Fetterman is at least making moves and demonstrating that he's a very solid candidate.
He's still campaigning around the state, isn't he?
Both of them, or well, Fetterman is who you're asking, or
Oh yeah, Fetterman. Okay, so
yeah, I believe so.
I mean, I assume that Oz is going to be fairly vigorous in these final days.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I don't know if he's that vigorous of a candidate. Certainly not as much as Fetterman, but I mean, Fetterman wasn't touring the state as much for a little because he was recovering, but I believe he's sort of back on the campaign schedule.
Yeah, I think he's back on the campaign schedule too. So if if the campaign schedule is one that's fairly exacting and people see that,
Mm-hmm.
and he does well when October 28th comes, it's probably going to be hard for us to beat him then.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we shift over to Oregon then?
The Oregon 6 race? Yeah, if you want.
The Oregon 6th race. In that race, we have a lady by the name of Andrea Salinas, who won the primary. There were a number of people running in the primary, and there was a ton of money coming from the crypto billionaire Samuel Bankman-Fried.
Mm-hmm.
Put in something like $11 million in that race.
Yeah, I think it got up to 13.
Oh, did he get up to 13?
Oh. Or maybe that was 13 with all the spending from all the candidates, but I think, yeah.
But there was just a huge amount of money placed behind someone who was an unknown congressional candidate and who didn't have much experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were a number of other candidates who were running, including one good one. Okay, and Andrea Salinas beat the field.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and beat the pants off of Carrick Flynn.
Yeah.
Okay, who was the unknown that had the $11 million.
Yeah.
So certainly in an extreme situation, that race shows that money isn't everything.
Yeah, certainly.
There are a lot of other factors in campaign,
mm-hmm.
and Carrick Flynn had no other factors going for him.
Yeah.
Right. So, but he did lose. But now, here comes Andrea Salinas, and she is facing now someone who's very rich in his own right and who's run twice before. His name is Mike Erickson, I think, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. And so he's putting all kinds of money in the campaign, and apparently has a big funding advantage over Salinas. Is that right?
I don't know how big it is necessarily. Actually, I didn't end up seeing what Salinas's report is. Let me just double check that. Where do you find that?
Okay, this congressional race is important because it's an entirely new congressional district.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if Andrea Salinas wins, then next time she's likely to have the advantage, okay, of incumbency.
Mm-hmm.
And we could be seeing the beginning of a lengthy congressional career here.
Yeah. So Salinas still has 100,000 more that she's raised over the course of the campaign. So she's raised 2.3 million. He's raised 2.2 million. I forget that includes anything he's donated to his own campaign. I don't quite remember what those numbers are. This cycle or this quarter, though, Salinas raised just short of $100,000 in net contributions. I mean, sorry, not 100,000, of 1 million in net contributions, whereas Mike Erickson actually only raised about $250,000. So she is still out.
A big funding advantage in the
He has a big fundraising advantage. I think the issue is in part about the independent expenditures in this race, I want to say. Salinas really doesn't have anything other than maybe the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and I don't even know if they're really getting involved in the race, at least as of yet. Let me just double check this before I say anything. Because is it? Oh, I don't know why the FEC doesn't show the independent expenditures in here. Let me check something then. Yeah, so he's raised, just a little bit less than her. But I want to say that there was, it's not showing up here. The Take Back Oregon PAC and some other PACs that were spending quite a bit in Erickson's favor. But anyway.
So those are Republican PACs.
Yeah, I think that's like the GOP PAC that's trying to flip Oregon red or whatever right now.
Were there any super PACs that were donating to Erickson?
Not donating, because they have to. Super PACs can only do independent expenditures.
Right, that's right, independent expenditures.
But at least what the FEC shows in the processed reports right now, but a lot of those are kind of missing sometimes off its website. The Take Back Oregon is the one from the general election that has been putting a few thousand at least. But I know that there was a report recently about something else in terms of big money in that race. Are you there? I'm kind of frozen. I don't know.
Yes, I am here. I am not frozen. I am listening intently.
Oh, no, you can take over now if you stuff you want to say about it.
Well, I didn't want to say anything about it. I wanted to ask you some more questions.
Oh, okay.
Specifically, based on what you said, okay, based on her fundraising in very recently, it seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm behind her. I take it that most of her donations are also small donations.
Yeah, not really. I'd have to look more through the recent report. My assumption is there aren't really PACs other than progressive PACs donating to her after the primary. Especially a lot of them went to other candidates, and I probably put in some sort of a bad taste with her. And my assumption and hope is that she sort of keeps that campaign relatively free of any sort of corporate or super PAC or dark money. And she is pretty well grassroots fundraised as a candidate.
So the money she's raised is an indicator of considerable grassroots enthusiasm for her.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a way to look at it. Certainly, when you think relative to Carrick Flynn or Michael, I keep forgetting Mike Erickson. Yeah.
And he doesn't have a funding advantage at the moment, though, of course.
It's very close, but really only because he's able to put, he's a multimillionaire who can put a lot of his own money into buying TV ads for himself.
Right, so he can probably continue to do that in the final days. But how much cash does she have on hand?
That's a good question, actually. He left off with only 26,000 cash on hand.
Whoa.
So that's actually pretty low. But of course, he can sort of put that. Because he actually spent about a little under 1 million this quarter on ads, while only raising about $250,000, which is a high burn rate for money a month before the election.
Right.
Selenia's, on the other hand, seems to have, so she has about 206,000. She's actually outspending him on ads and stuff too. She has $1.2 million that she spent on ads or other expenditures this quarter.
Okay, so unless he's planning on an ad blitz in the final 3 weeks, okay, it looks like she's going to have an ad advantage.
Well, yeah, additionally, just, she is less scandal free. She's not a perennial candidate. She's a well-established state representative, right? Who had a lot of enthusiasm in the primary. Erickson really didn't get that because he didn't really have a competitive primary.
Yeah.
He hasn't. She doesn't have any real scandals. I don't even think she has any minor scandals. Whereas Erickson has had some scandals on, policy positions, social positions he's taken, paying for his partner's abortion, and sort of similar to the Herschel Walker thing. I know he was arrested several years back. I want to say it was one of the first times he ran for office for DUI with a Schedule II drug, I think, oxycodone or something. So pretty colorful past, to say the least. And it doesn't seem like his money, seems like he's kind of running low on money, maybe, in terms of what he's willing to spend. Whereas Selenia seems to have a pretty healthy supply of donations that are actually coming from real people instead of herself. And she's not got that scandal. So I know a lot of people right now are sort of saying, oh, I'll lean Republican or toss up race. Ultimately, I do think Selenia is still in a good place. But
does it sound to you like it should be a toss-up race?
No, and the district, I can't remember what it was. It was like 6 to 8 points, I think, in favor of Biden. And so it looks like a somewhat competitive race, but one that Dems should still win. And I think that ultimately that's going to be what happens. The worst case scenario is that there's enough GOP momentum in these sort of swing state Oregon elections because of the governor's race too, that Democrats underperform and maybe they lose one of those 3 or 2 of those 3 seats. And the House,
generally speaking, Oregon isn't a swing state, is it?
No, not really. But with redistricting, they did sort of put some of the House races into a competitive position. And there is an independent who's cutting into a lot of the Democratic support in the governor's race, although that seems to be dwindling. So the governor's race is sort of a toss-up. For a while, it was looking like Republicans might flip it. At the same time, I think that the polling is showing that the independent is gaining less support. And if that happens, that likely means the Democrat is going to be getting more support, which should sort of balance Oregon, maybe closer to the left.
The independent in the governor's race should not affect the votes in the congressional race.
No, but by that I just mean because the independent is doing well enough to sort of give Republicans a chance in the governor's race. It seems like that with the new districts that are somewhat competitive in the 4th, 5th, and 6th, that Republicans are putting a lot of money into Oregon, and putting a lot of momentum to maybe try and shift it to the right again a little bit, in hopes of winning a governor's office or maybe pulling a House seat or two.
But is there any polling data on that race,
On the governor's race of the 6th district.
the 6th district?
So we did get a poll a couple weeks ago at the beginning of October that I think showed Salinas. I want to say she had a 1-point lead. Yeah, she was 45 to Erickson's 44. And then before that, in mid-August and September, it showed Erickson with a few points lead, but the poll was very weird. It kind of just showed Erickson with a 9-point lead, and I think that at that time was just a little absurd for that point in the race. And it was from a not that well-established polling company. So.
Okay, so you think Salinas is likely to win?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize it was muted. Yeah, I do think Salinas is going to win.
Okay, I think so too. I suppose the reason why I think so is she has the strengths that we already knew she had from the primary race. She won that based on her contacts and the immersion she had in her district. In other words, lots of social networking, but kind of in back of her there.
Yeah.
It's a strength. What you said about the recent fundraising suggests that there's probably a lot of grassroots support for her in terms of the race. He doesn't have a big funding advantage right now.
He doesn't have any. She still has a fundraising. She has, what was that? About $175,000 extra dollars on hand than he does, and she's raised about $1 million more.
It seemed to me it was more than that. Didn't you say she had something like 260,000 on hand?
Yeah, she had 260,000. He had like 25,000. Yeah. So that would be.
So it's a 10-to-1 advantage.
Yeah, something.
Cash on hand, and the absolute amount of cash on hand he has is really a pittance if you're looking at the last 3 weeks. Okay, and the need maybe to have an ad blitz the last 3 weeks. So, and she is much stronger than he in terms of the political base that she has in the state, right?
Yeah.
So all that points to what will probably be a big victory for her. It won't be 1 point.
Yeah.
It'll be more like between 5 and 10 points. Okay. Going back to Pennsylvania, we didn't really actually make any picks there yet, right?
What do you mean by picks?
Well, what I mean is I don't think we said, well, I think it's probably going to be Fetterman in that race.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be Fetterman. I think Fetterman's going to end up with a lean to likely margin, right? 4 to 6 points would probably be good for him. There. Yeah.
He's also likely to make a colorful play of some kind in the final days, right? Because he's that kind of candidate.
Yeah, certainly, something could come up, or if not on his side, could see another Oz scandal or another weird Oz comment or two. Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking more about maybe something really clever in the advertising department, but coming out of the Fetterman side, because during this whole race, their messaging has been pretty clever.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. So they have the necessary money they're probably going to come out with a clever message. Also, Fetterman is much more likely to produce an economic message that's compelling than Oz. I mean, all Oz is going to do is say, "Oh, look at the inflation. It's the Democrats' fault that there's all this inflation."
Mhm.
And if Fetterman comes back with answers that say, "Hey, look, there's this, statistical evidence that 53% of the inflation is due to price gouging by big corporations."
Mhm.
I mean, he's got the numbers to show that.
Yeah.
But Katie Porter has been kind of running about that. Running on that in her district.
Mhm.
She just did a show in the Congress where she was emphasizing the analysis that was done by the EPI,
Mhm.
showing that 53% of the inflation that we have can be accounted for by price gouging.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good argument.
Mhm.
And they'll have some numbers and charts to boost on that. And he can probably emphasize that in the final days. I don't think Oz is going to have an answer to that.
Yeah.
And then there are the crowds and the rallies. I don't have the impression that Oz has rallies with very many enthusiastic people. I don't think Trump is coming back to the state for the final days. Do you?
I don't believe so. I think he's doing some rallies in Texas, but otherwise, I haven't heard anything. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes up to like Wisconsin or something, maybe in Pennsylvania. But I don't honestly think that that would benefit Oz.
Okay. And Oz himself can't pull in the crowds, can he?
Not that I've seen, no. He's at pretty small events. He did, interestingly enough, have a fundraiser at a World War II museum where he fundraised in front of Hitler's car. That was very weird. Or he gave like a speech, and right behind him was like Hitler's car on display. Yeah.
And not a good selection of atmosphere.
No, a little weird.
So it does look like Fetterman has the advantage going into the final days, except for the national trend
Yeah.
toward the Republicans.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that that's really the only thing that I think gives Republicans any sort of a chance in some of these races. Like you think about Georgia or Arizona, Pennsylvania. I think Republicans lose those races. The only way that I really see any sort of a chance for those three candidates is Republicans doing well enough in the national environment. And honestly, I don't think that that's going to happen. Joe Biden's approval is sort of flatlining, while his disapproval, I think, is growing a little bit, which isn't great. But overall, I think things are sort of, I don't know, going to balance out for Dems again.
So it may depend on, I guess over the last week, there's been a lot of emphasis by progressives talking about a shift in campaign strategy.
Mm.
Starting to emphasize the economic issues, forging an answer to the Republicans' inflation argument, taking them head on that argument.
Mm-hmm.
They have plenty of money on the Democratic side right now, right?
Yeah, they're the Democratic Party, at least in terms of the campaigns and the party spending, things like the House Majority PAC and things like that, are all raising significantly more than the Republicans. The only thing is Republicans also have quite a decent supply worth of, independent expenditures and those sort of things from super PAC.
They have a big super PAC advantage.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how big it is because that's sort of hard to compare.
It's hard to compare because the data's not there.
Yeah, and like there's just always all sorts of super PAC, and it's just hard to really add all of that up. But overall, my sense is, historically speaking, and what we see now is that Republicans do have a decent advantage in terms of super PAC expenditures.
Yeah, but it's even hard to put numbers on what we call a decent advantage, right?
Yeah, I mean,
The
yeah,
data's not there yet.
yeah, the data's not there, and it would just take a lot of time to sort of be going through all this data and all these super PACs and stuff. Generally speaking, if you just look at campaign expenditures or campaign contributions, Democrats have decent, 500,000 in a lot of House races, 1 million in some, and in the Senate races, millions or millions, million or millions in terms of advantages over Republicans in fundraising. But when you take in consideration of all the super PACs that's been for the parties, I know somebody did do some of the data and they found that Republicans tended to have a pretty high advantage over Democrats. And independent expenditures, I think a lot of it was showing sort of that same 500,000 to 1.5 million lead for Republicans in a lot of races. But I think that was, a couple of weeks old, so might change. But
Have super PACs like the DMFI uh, and the APAC super PAC. I forget its name now.
United Democracy Front.
Yeah, United
Project,
Democracy super
UDP,
PAC.
program. Yeah.
Have they been active in these campaigns on the Republican side?
To mine, well, DMFI, no, they are a Democratic PAC, so they really don't support Republicans the way APAC does. APAC, to my understanding, other than incumbents, isn't spending really on Republicans in open races. There might be a couple exceptions for that. I saw that they weren't really getting that involved in the general elections, which was interesting until I can't remember which campaign. I think they did just do an ad blitz for some campaign. I know people were talking about it, but
So we hope they don't intervene in the final days.
yeah, hopefully not.
Okay, so with these two races, we don't think it's looking too bad for the Democrats.
Yeah. And I guess since we can probably talk about the House later in the week or whenever, if we want to get a better idea.
Yeah, we're going to go over your financial information tomorrow.
Yeah, I think because it's still sort of a lot of information to be processing. So I'm still looking at a lot of the House races. But if we do want to talk about the Senate races, I do sort of have all that information if you still want.
Okay, we do want to talk about the Senate races. Let's see what the story is right now. Let's see how we're doing tonight. Okay, we're about 9:38. Why don't we start to talk about the Senate races today?
Mm-hmm.
And then tomorrow, we could do a 9 o'clock show tomorrow, or we could do something like a 5 o'clock show tomorrow.
Yeah, something like that. I'll see about my schedule. But yeah.
Would you prefer a 5 o'clock show or a 9 o'clock show, do you think?
5 o'clock might actually work better when I think about it. But
okay.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's start going over the Senate then.
Yeah, so overall, like I mentioned earlier, I sort of paid attention to 10 Senate races, or really 8 Senate races, actually, if you're not counting the Alaska race between the two Republicans. And overall, I think each of those races, it was Democrats had a very demonstrable lead over the Republicans in terms of campaign contributions, and it was actually pretty interesting. Mark Kelly raised almost 20 million, just short of that. He raised 19.7 million this quarter, the highest of any Democrat other than Warnock and Fetterman. And then Blake Masters, his Republican opponent, actually only raised 3.6 million. So that's, he raised 6 times as much as him or so, which is a pretty strong lead in what people would consider to be a swing district. I certainly agree with the fact that Republican or Democrats might win this district by more than 5 points. Could end up.
This district or the state?
The state is what I mean by district, right?
Yeah,
I think
so you think Mark Kelly is going to win by?
I think Mark Kelly could win 5 to 8%. The only thing that could hurt that is the sort of some of those statewide elections that aren't looking nearly as good for Democrats. But those races can operate independently a bit as well, right?
Yeah,
And Mark,
people in Arizona do tend to split tickets, right?
yeah, exactly. I mean, Arizona is a swing state that has seen a lot of Democratic gains, but still votes for Republicans in many cases. So split ticket voting, I wouldn't be that surprised about. Yeah, and certainly Mark Kelly holds a much higher lead than any of the Republicans running statewide, and a lead that's increasing. By the way,
How much of a lead does Kelly have over Blake Masters?
so he still has about a 6-point polling advantage. Something close to that is what the 538 average is right now, 6%. But it is getting a little better. I think his campaign is sort of not changing all that much. Like his support is sort of staying close to its base, but Blake Masters is sort of decreasing. Last I checked, right? Yeah. So Blake Masters had 43% as of October 10th, and now he's dropped down to 42. And Mark Kelly sort of stayed about the same. Even as the national environment's gotten worse for Democrats, Mark Kelly over the past couple of weeks has only dropped from 48.9% to 48% on the RCP or 538 average, whereas his opponent has dropped more, which is sort of opposite you're seeing in many races, which I think shows that this is probably a really good race.
Okay, so there's no momentum for Blake Masters.
Yeah, I don't think so, and I think the financial record sort of indicated that as well. After the fact that everyone already was kind of knowing that. Yeah.
Okay, good. You were, I think, saying before some things that looked fairly favorable for the Georgia races.
Yeah, so Raphael Warnock raised more than any of the Democratic candidates I looked at, right? He raised $24.5 million this quarter for his campaign, compared to Herschel Walker raising $11 million, which is still a decent amount for a Senate candidate. And Herschel Walker raised more, about $1 million more than Ron Johnson, and millions more than any of the other Senate Republican candidates in those swing races, right? But that's still, Warnock has more than twice the amount of money Herschel Walker has. Take into consideration the fact that Herschel Walker's campaign is sort of imploding and Warnock's doing a lot better statewide. And I expect that to sort of continue too. It's another race that hasn't seen a real decline over the past couple of weeks, from my understanding. I can double check, but the past couple of weeks.
Let's ask, was there any change in the momentum of the race as a result of the recent debate between Walker and Warnock?
Yeah, so I think the debate sort of showed Walker as a very weak candidate, and Raphael sort of showed that he's an incumbent Democratic senator. He does well at debating. He sort of knows what he's talking about. Walker, on the other hand, doesn't really. He's not that poised. He's not that informed on policy. He's got a lot of scandals, and so he's sort of having the same drop off Blake Masters is having, while Warnock is sort of stagnant, but sort of rising a little bit incrementally. So similar to the Arizona race, and going into this final stretch, I'm sure that Warnock is going to have more money, and if the polls do tighten again, I'm sure that there's going to be a significant amount. I'm sure Democrats would be willing to put a significant amount into protecting this seat. If Warnock really needs that sort of cash infusion, which after this, it doesn't really look like he needs, but.
Good. So that's good.
The race that I would say surprised me the most in the Senate was actually that Michael Franken, the Democratic candidate in the Iowa race, raised $3.6 million, whereas Chuck Grassley raised $1.6 million. So he raised $2 million more than Chuck Grassley. Some polls have started to indicate a closer race, not only in that district, but in the Iowa House races. Cindy Axne is doing better in the 3rd district. And she also outraced her opponent pretty handedly, if I want to say. So I have the numbers for the House races there. Cindy Axne raised over $500,000 more than her House opponent in that race. So that's sort of moving that district more to the lean or tilt Democrat, whereas a lot of people have sort of been putting it as a GOP flip. And the Democrat in the 2nd district against Ashley Hinson came pretty close to outraising her. And in the 1st district, Marianne Miller Meeks just raised just barely $1 million. So she only raised about 150,000 more than her opponent, which isn't that much in a House race.
No.
So take into sort of consideration, Democrats are doing really well fundraising in Iowa. And there seems to be starting to be some sort of anti-Grassley voting, which might be a result of, I think, age, especially. A lot of people sort of look at him. He's I don't know if there are any debates planned, but he isn't really the greatest speaker anymore. He doesn't have like good House speeches or anything like that, and his brain is kind of deteriorating. And so I think that that's going to make the race.
I think he's 89.
Yeah, something like that. He's been the senator for Iowa for about a third of the state's history.
Yeah,
Or he's been involved in the politics of Iowa for about a third of its history.
Yeah.
And so
Franken is an admiral, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know quite his position, but yeah, he was in the military. Yep. I don't think, don't get me wrong, I'm not falling for the sort of the liberal idea that Iowa is gonna flip, or then a lot of these swing states will flip when they won't. But I think it is interesting just to note that Democrats seem to be doing a lot better in Iowa than we possibly would have expected.
Is J.D. Scholten still running for stuff there?
No. Actually, yeah, he ran uncontested for a state house race in a Democratic district. So he's going to be in the Iowa House of Representatives.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he was a pretty good candidate in the past.
Yeah.
I noticed. Disappointing a little bit. Where is Tim Ryan standing right now?
So Tim Ryan, I still don't think Tim Ryan is winning, but I think just because I think Iowa's hard to win, Ohio, I mean, it's hard to win for Democrats, but he did raise over 10 million more than his opponent, right? So that's in a very good position. His opponent raised 4 million, he raised 15 million. And with the recent debate performances, all the sort of facts about his candidate, his opponent not being that great of a candidate, he's got some better ads. I think overall I don't know what that was. Something fell. I think overall he's in a very good position. I just don't think Democrats are going to win it at the end of the day, especially if the national environment isn't looking as great for them. But yeah.
But if they can improve the environment over the next 3 weeks, that makes that different then, doesn't it?
Yeah, I certainly think it'll be a competitive race it's probably, in terms of Democrats, if you're looking at the Senate especially, it's probably the race that they can most expect to sort of upset. But I wouldn't be betting on Tim Ryan just because of how Iowa is. And the polling is very weak for Tim Ryan. Like, it's between a tie or like a lean Tim Ryan for the most part, although I think the polling is now showing J.D. Vance taking the lead. So given that polls tend to have a bias a bit towards Democrats, if he's not polling, 5 points or 4 points leads, then I'm really not going to say that I think he's going to win. But
okay. In Iowa, do you think Franken's going to win?
No, I don't think Franken's going to win. It's sort of the same case, although I think Franken's a little worse off than Tim Ryan. But I think certainly it could be closer and could halt sort of Iowa from going red if Sydney Axie can hold her seat, or somehow Democrats come very close to flipping the second district or something like that. Or if they do flip it, I think that sort of puts Iowa in a better position for Democrats nationwide, or in the state, but not nationwide.
Okay, what's happening in Wisconsin?
Wisconsin, not really much has changed, other than the fact Mandela Barnes did raise 18 million. Ron Johnson raised 10 million. But I'm sure with all the independent expenditures and everything, Ron Johnson's still got a financial advantage. Mandela Barnes, I wouldn't say he's problematic, but he doesn't seem to be getting a lot of appeal for voters. And Ron Johnson's polls are just increasing. His lead in the polls, he's at 3% now. In the polls. So, if you compare, they were tied for the polls in September, and then Ron Johnson gained about 2 points since the end of September, whereas Mandela Barnes has lost about a point or half a point since then. So there seems to be a surge in Ron Johnson's support unexpectedly, and Mandela Barnes seems to have really dropped off from the 50% he was polling in the middle of September. That's about a 4-point drop since then.
Okay. Has Barnes been running on abortion?
Yeah, I think to some extent, I think a lot of people are just saying he runs on attacking Ron Johnson, but not that aggressively or that effectively. And he's maybe not talking about all the issues he should be. And so I don't know. It doesn't seem, I think a lot of Democrats are sort of giving up on that race a little bit, maybe, from my understanding.
So Barnes could be helped by a shift over to economic issues.
Yeah, certainly. I can't say I followed his campaign that extensively, but in the past few months at least. But certainly his campaign needs to be doing something different and maybe doing something more like other swing state candidates, right? Being more aggressive like Tim Ryan and John Fetterman, sticking more to the issues in the ways that Fetterman or other ones are. And he doesn't seem to be doing that. But.
Okay. What's your take on Maggie Hassan's race?
I don't even I don't think there's a snowball chance for Republicans to flip that race. The Republican is way out there. He's awful at fundraising. I wouldn't even be surprised if he fundraised under $1 million. Maggie Hassan's a great fundraiser. They had a debate that was just frankly embarrassing for the Republican. I can't remember the quote. I didn't even actually put that in my the races I was keeping track of because I just know it's going to be likely Democrat. And the Republicans have they severely missed out by not having the mayor run or the governor run for New Hampshire or having Kelly Ayoade, the former senator. Otherwise, all their candidates.
Yeah, I know who she is. Who was the governor? Sununu?
Yes, Sununu.
Yeah, Sununu, the junior.
Yeah.
The junior Sununu. Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Okay, a big name in that state, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. The thing was, so in the debate, it might not have been a debate, but anyway, Bolduc, the Republican candidate, basically said that women need to get over overturning Roe v. Wade, and that women get the best voice in politics when gentlemen make the decision about their reproductive health and things like that. And it was just weird. I don't know.
But. Yeah, that is weird today. Very weird. Okay, of course, now I have to ask a question about Sherry Beasley in North Carolina. Has she got a chance?
The polls actually are getting a little better for her recently. I sort of wasn't really paying attention to the race because I sort of saw it similar to Florida, but not as bad for Democrats, and just that it wasn't going to flip. Joe Cunningham was in a pretty good situation in 2020, and the fact that he lost was pretty embarrassing. And I don't think Sherry Beasley's doing much to change that model at all.
But in the Cunningham race, wasn't there some?
There was a last-minute scandal about.
There was a scandal, a sex scandal, in that race that sort of screwed up the race. But that's not for. Sherry Beasley doesn't have that, does she?
That's true, but she also, I don't know, doesn't seem to be having as much momentum, and maybe that's because Democrats are more focused on Pennsylvania and holding their incumbents and things like that. She did raise quite a lot, and Ted Budd actually only raised about $3 million, which was pretty low. She raised $12 million. That being said, polling hasn't shown that much in her favor. Budd's got about a percent increase in the polls in the past month, and Beasley's gone down by. She pretty much follows the national average. She sort of stagnated, maybe went down a little bit since September, but doesn't seem to be gaining any real support or anything like that. And I wouldn't be that surprised if that doesn't change.
Okay, what's your take on Val Demings and Marco Rubio?
That's like my equivalent of New Hampshire for Democrats. Val Demings ran an awful campaign. She talked about how she was basically a cop and her husband's a cop and weird conservative policies, and she just kind of ran a little bit as like a stop Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio agenda. I don't know. The Florida Democratic Party is like really bad, very poor infrastructure. Their website isn't even their website. It's Republicans bought the domain forever ago, and they use it to attack Democratic candidates. They don't have very good party leadership there, and they've got really poor returns on their elections over the past few cycles. And so
Who's
I
the
think
party leader in Florida?
I don't even know who that is. I think it's changed a few times recently, but yeah.
Okay, so you don't think it's Debbie Wasserman Schultz, do you?
No, she's not leaving the
Okay.
state party.
I guess I had to ask that question. Okay, going back up to Australia. Sorry,
Australia.
to Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Australia, yeah. We should be so lucky. So, okay. Peltola, is it?
Yeah, so actually Patola, I think, probably had the best gains of any House Democrat. So after her special election, which just let me double check, Alaska. I just want to check the date, right? And she won the race. It was sort of a bit of an upset, right? That was the beginning of September, right?
Yeah.
So there was that pre-primary filing period, right? And that was end of August, right? So instead of having that full quarter of the end of June to end of September included in the filing period, her filing period was shorter because she filed the end of August for that special election, right? So over the past 2 months, she has actually raised $2 million, over $2 million, which is more than any of the other House races I've followed, and in only half as much time. And while she's raised $2 million, Sarah Palin's raised 10% of that. She's raised $230,000. And Nick Begich, the other Republican candidate, has only raised $57,000. So Patola, I think at this point, even sort of Republicans seem to be acknowledging the fact that Patola is probably going to win.
She was running as a Democrat, right?
Yeah, she's a Democrat. And I actually think, I don't know if she's joined the Congressional Progressive Caucus, but I believe that's the plan. Let me see, actually. She certainly seems a bit more progressive than she does moderate or conservative. So, yeah.
Have we had a progressive person as a representative in Alaska?
I mean, not ever as a representative. I mean, Mike Gravel was the senator there for a while.
Yeah, he was the senator, and before him there was Greening, Ernest Greening.
Yep.
Who was also very progressive.
Mm-hmm.
They both were. But all I can remember since then is a bunch of really corrupt people on the Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
Except, of course, for Lisa Murkowski. I don't think she is really that corrupt, is she? She's just that.
And not from my understanding, and that's the party's always trying to get rid of her. So I wouldn't be.
Yeah, the Republican Party's trying to get rid of her. Right? Is she running against this year?
Yes, she is running again. She does have a very strong GOP challenger, and I say very strong just because the party's supporting them more. Lisa Murkowski, rather, still outraised her. Both of them raised under $1 million, which was surprising. Well, I guess not that. And so, but Lisa Murkowski still raised about 70.
Peltola raised $2 million for a House race.
Mm-hmm. And half as much time as Lisa Murkowski and her opponent collectively raised less than $2 million.
Yeah.
In what is considered to be a pretty competitive race. And actually, I don't know if there's that much polling on it, but from my understanding, it's more competitive than most of the other House races or Senate races. But although I think at this point, Lisa Murkowski is favored. That's certainly how I see the race. I don't know if that's the general consensus or not. But
yeah, that doesn't surprise me. There's something about her. She always
Yeah.
wins.
Yeah.
By hook or by crook, even though they don't like her.
Hmm.
She always wins. If she switched parties, she could probably throw Joe Manchin out of the chairmanship
Hmm.
of his committee. Okay. The only trouble is they're so close. They,
Hmm.
seem to me to like the alternation.
Hmm.
Uh, have we missed any Senate races that are
No, those are all the ones I'm focused on.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the comments then and see if we have missed anything there. Okay, so K. Ryan says Ohio sucks bad.
True.
She lives in Ohio.
Yep.
Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm not sure Fetterman wins. Well, Steve, I'm not sure Fetterman wins either, since it seems to be only 3 or 4 points now. But yeah,
Yeah.
shortly. So Steve says, be prepared to lose badly. And Kay says, you're bumming me out, Steve.
I mean, yeah, I think there's certainly an argument to be had that Democrats aren't going to do as well as they wish, as they think. But I think in some ways, polls might be underestimating the number of newly registered, particularly younger, more women voters. Things like that. That might be really contributing factors to this election. But
So Kay says that Hartman is really bumming about the Oregon race. I take it you mean that he is bummed about the state of the Oregon race, right? Yes, he does live there now. He's on the spot, and he probably has a good feel for what's going to happen. Oh, Steve Wolfbrand says that Fetterman can't understand a speech. I'm sorry, ain't going to happen. Well, remember, uh, he's going to have the, what do they call it? The translator.
yeah, the Q prompt things.
Yeah, he's going to be able to rely on that, Steve. So he should be able to understand the speech. So we get a lot of highs. And I think, did we miss any comments? Is voting Republican to oust the Inca okay? I'm sorry, the Inca? Who's the Inca?
I'm assuming he means incumbents, but
Oh, the incumbent. Is voting Republican to oust the incumbent okay? But even though you know they won't win, the incumbent or the Republican? Oh, you mean a protest vote because you're sure the incumbent is going to win in California? Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all right if you want to register a protest vote. Oh, he says incumbent. Yeah, he's got that. Yeah, it's all right by me. Steve Wolfbrand says BBQ. I take it that is barbecue. Steve says no coattails at all. Who doesn't have any coattails? You mean Biden? Steve says good night, everyone. Good night, Steve. You've been going to bed early lately. Just, I have to get to bed. Good night, all. Thanks for coming, Steve. Kay says, wish North Carolina would go blue again. I'd love to go back there someday. But only if they go blue, Kay, right? And Steve says, I'm back. I'm glad you're back. Kay says, I can't spell today. Okay, so it looks like we're done with your comments. And I think we're on target time-wise also. So thank you, Ezra. We'll be in touch tomorrow
Yeah,
to set up the other show, right?
sounds good. Yep.
Okay. So I'll see you then. Have a very good evening.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
I notice it's well, we're on the same time zone, so you're at 10:06
Yeah.
p.m. also. Okay. Okay, take it easy. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. Bye.
I will. Thanks. Okay. Laura says, thank you, everyone. Good night.
Getting colder in here.
Is it getting colder in here?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then it's time to turn on the heat
Okay.
because the heat is not on. But we are still live, so I have to end the broadcast. Kay says, right, Joe, North Carolina's been ruined by the GOP. Dolores says, thank you, everyone, and good night. Thank you, Dolores.